Hey, everybody, welcome back to Meta Perspective. And today we are honored with a guest, Muho Noelke. So welcome, Muho.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. I'm really glad you can make it. And just for people listening, I know I'm not great with names. So how do you pronounce your name properly?
Well, Muho is Muho. That's the name I got in Japan when I ordained as a Zen monk. And Noelke is my family name from Germany. So you can either spell that with an O or an O with 2 points, this kind of metal way of putting 2 points over the O, or you can have an OE. So probably you pronounced it O Nolki. No, how did you pronounce it? Well, I'm not sure, but I mean, in German it
Yeah.
would be Nolki, and it's not really important anyway.
Yeah. So I'm really glad to have you on. And part of why I asked to have you on is I actually came across your work very recently because of a book that you helped translate called "To You: The Zen Sayings of Kodo Sawaki." And for people listening, can you give them a little background on? Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's actually I love
That's
the
it,
cover.
exactly.
I love the cover. And can you tell people a little bit about Kodo Sawaki?
Yeah, Kodo Sawaki. I think he was born in 1818 or around that time. He died in 1965. So he died 3 years before I was born. I never met him, obviously. Um, Sometimes he's described as a kind of a Zen rebel. He was kind of an outsider, although in his time he was also quite popular in the way that, well, when we talk about Zen in the West, we think about sitting practice. But when you talk about Buddhism in Japan, including Zen, people usually think about funerals. When you die, you call a priest, and the priest will do the funeral. So at the time of Sawaki, that means about 100 years ago, a lot of both monks and also people in the secular world had forgotten about meditation. They thought that Buddhism means to pray for the deceased. So Sawaki was somebody who said, well, let's cut the crap and sit. And another thing that was popular at Sawaki's time was people were rediscovering meditation, but what a lot of people said, and that's probably also true in the West, there must be a reason why people have been meditating for 2,500 years, and that's to gain enlightenment, just as the Buddha did. We don't know exactly what he gained when he gained this enlightenment, but there must have been some big thing. Maybe it was like an LSD trip, or maybe whatever. We don't know what it was, but it sounds interesting. And in Japanese, they have this word satori. That must be it. For example, what was really popular at the time, also in the West, is D.T. Suzuki. And D.T. Suzuki writes about it all the time. There's this satori experience. You can't express it in words, but when you sit and maybe you contemplate some koans, these riddles, you might get it if you train with an enlightened teacher. And Sawaki said, no, the Zen is good for nothing. That's one of the famous phrases in this book. What is the Zen good for? It's good for nothing. And unless you practice with this attitude, it's going to really be good for nothing. And a lot of people are surprised when they hear that for the first time. How can it be good for nothing? And why should I practice it if it's good for
Yeah.
nothing? All I do because it's good for something. I work for the money. I go to the bar, so in the hope that I meet a beautiful girl. And when I meditate, I don't do it for nothing. I want something for my money. If I pay good money for my retreat, I want some enlightenment experience, or at least I want a clearer mind. I want to be relaxed. I practice mindfulness so that I work more efficiently, whatever. And for Sawaki, it's exactly this attitude that I want something that makes us just like donkeys that chase a carrot. And he says, Zazen means stopping to chase the carrot. Just sit, quit the game, so to speak. You were chasing money, you were chasing girls, and now you're chasing enlightenment experiences. But the difference isn't so big. It's not so big. So stop chasing, just sit. So that's basically Sawaki. And he also used to be the abbot of Antai-ji, where I trained later. He has some important students in the West. In Europe, it was Deshimaru. In America, now you have Okumura Shohaku, but also Shunryu Suzuki, who was in San Francisco. He's not a direct student of Sawaki, but he's also connected to Sawaki. Katagiri in Minneapolis was connected to Sawaki. So Sawaki had a quite big influence on Zen in the West.
Yeah, and I actually was introduced to Zen, some years ago through the Shunryu Suzuki book, and that's such a great book, The Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Yes.
But I'm not, you'll certainly know better than me. The shikantaza, the just sitting approach, was that something that was really emphasized by Kodo Sawaki?
For sure. I mean, he's not the first one who came up with the idea. That would be Dogen. Dogen said we don't practice to get enlightenment, but the practice of just sitting is a manifestation of enlightenment. So the two go together. One example that he gives, it's like fanning. The moment you fan, there's going to be air, but the moment you stop, there's no, the air is there, but you don't have the breeze. So fanning means to be in the breeze. Stopping to fan, there's no breeze anymore. So for Dogen, practice and enlightenment are one. While we usually have the idea, I practice now to get my enlightenment tomorrow. And once I have my enlightenment tomorrow, I don't have to practice anymore. Why should I? That would be stupid. And people who have that view, they usually come with the metaphor of you cross a river, you need a boat for that. But once you've reached the other shore, you don't need the boat anymore. Why would you be attached to sitting practice? While for Dogen, when we use this metaphor, it's basically that you discover nirvana in the boat. You discover that rowing the boat means to attain nirvana. It's not that you reach the other shore and then you got nirvana, but you thought you were in samsara and you thought I need to get into nirvana, but then you discover when you row the boat and you do just that, just sitting in this case, you just sit here and now. And you realize I was never separated from nirvana. It was always here.
And Sawaki, Kodo Sawaki was influenced by Dogen?
Of course, yeah. I mean, in Zen, you got two big schools in Japan, Rinzai, Soto. Soto was founded by Dogen, and Sawaki belongs into that school. And Rinzai is a little bit different in the respect they use koans, and koans are tools that can help you to get enlightenment experiences. So a Rinzai teacher would probably be more inclined to say, no, Zazen is not good for nothing. Or maybe it's good for nothing if you don't use koans and you just waste your time. But if you have a right teacher and you use the right tools, it's going to get you to certain experiences. Although I have the feeling that even in Rinzai, basically you make a big round. You have these experiences, but you also return to this point where actually it was good for nothing. It's just that you have to take this circle, or it might be easier to, it's not really easier, but it's safer to take the circle. And because what can happen in Soto, people tell you in the beginning, Zazen is supposed to be good for nothing. And you sit on the cushion and it hurts and it's boring, it's frustrating, but your teacher told you it's good for nothing. So you tell yourself, okay, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. But then what can happen in Soto is after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're still not sure. So you're always in this state of good for nothingness, but you never really ground it in there. So the Rinzai approach also has part of the truth, and yet you also, it's good if you make some experiences that then basically they lead you back to right here and now. But then you don't have this, how do you say, it's like being in a relation with a girl. Sometimes in Soto, you're in a relation with girl, the girl is Zazen, but you always think about that other girl. But you know you're not supposed to think of her, so you say, okay, I'm fine with her, and we don't get so well with each other, but that other girl also, it wouldn't be good. So I don't think of this other girl. And Rinzai in that respect is you date a lot of girls, and then you find that actually being solo is the best thing in a way.
Yeah. And just actually, since we're touching on the subject, the actual in the 2U Zen sayings of Kodo Sawaki, in the epilogue, it touches on that subject of what happens if you're dissatisfied with Zazen. And can you explain who that was written by or said by, and the significance of that chapter?
That chapter was not in the original version of 2U. So it's a translation of a Japanese book that came out 30 years ago. That epilogue that you talk about is by Uchiyama Roshi. It's a disciple of Sawaki Roshi. And he compiled all these sayings. And he wrote that chapter for a different book, but I found that chapter is so important, essential, that I included it in this book. What he's basically addressing is this feeling that some of us, I think many of us, have, even after years of practice, that there's still something missing. Okay, I've been sitting for all these years, and now I can sit in full lotus, and I can sit for half an hour, maybe a full hour without moving. And I've studied the Shobo Genzo, and I know certain things about Buddhism, but that can't be all. Maybe I, after all, need this enlightenment experience. Maybe there's still something missing. And while Uchiyama in the epilogue writes about this feeling and how he himself felt like that a lot of times, but then he also explains using the teaching of his teacher Sawaki, but also Dogen, who lived 800 years ago, to explain how to work with that, and also what I just said, that enlightenment is not different from practice. So he used the metaphor of breathing. When we think about how often we have to breathe in and out during our lifetime, it might feel really tiring. You breathe in and out several times a minute, and it would be millions and billions of times until you die. So somebody might think, I want to take a really, really deep breath now and then stop breathing for the rest of my life. And Uchiyama says that's like this idea, I want my experience now and forever, and then I don't have to practice anymore. While Uchiyama says our daily practice is just like breathing. It's maybe not especially satisfying, but I mean, why should it be satisfying? It's this idea that, but I need to get something for sure. I want my, so to speak, one big breath that's going to fill my lungs, and then I can stop breathing. But that's not how it works, at least not in Soto Zen. You breathe in, you breathe out, and then you do the next breath.
Yeah. And actually, talking about the circle, I want to circle back now and just discuss, like how did you find Soto Zen and Kodo Sawaki and your journey kind of, or path around.
How did I find my path? You mean you mean in retrospect, or how did I get into the thing in the first place?
Yes.
I was first invited to join a Zen class when I was 16. I was living in a boarding school, and one of the teachers there, he was into Zen, and he invited all the students to come. And at the time, an Indian guru called Rajneesh, or later he called himself Osho. He was really big in Germany.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow.
And I think it was just at the time when he moved to Oregon. And there were these problems in Oregon, and there were also these rumors about all the Rolls Royce he had. So in my mind, meditation, it sounded suspicious. So I had seen these pictures of Rajneesh, and I heard about these transcendental meditation guys who could levitate. And in my mind, it was something that I didn't really want to have anything to do with. So I said, no, thank you. And 2 or 3 weeks later, because nobody came to the meditation classes, that a teacher went around the boarding school again and invited everybody to try. And I said, after he came for a second time, it sounded like a cult to me, or like a sect, like.
Yeah.
So I said, no, thank you, no, thank you. I'm really not into this. And so he asked me, have you ever tried? And I said, of course not. And I don't plan to try it ever. So then my teacher said, well, if you don't try once, how can you say you're not into it? Try it once and then tell me if you want to come a second time, or if you don't want, you can quit. So I went there for one time only, in my mind, with the idea of stopping. But then it was not so bad. It was different than I'd expected. One thing that I found interesting, or that surprised me, until that age, until I was 16, if you had asked me, where are you? Who are you? I would have pointed to my head and said, well, the guy who is seeing the world from here and who's thinking up here, that's me. And I never thought of that part below my neck of myself. I thought, well, if I have an accident and you could bring my brain to a hospital and attach it to a robot, and then the robot does all the work of my body, it wouldn't really make much of a difference as long as this part here is intact. That's me. So what surprised me is that when I sit in this posture, when I sit straight and still for even only 15 minutes, say, it makes a difference. I don't know why, but somehow when my posture changes, I change, the world changes. And that surprised me, because in class, in school, I was usually sitting like this or was sitting like that. And sometimes my teachers would say, hey, boy, you should do something about your posture. And I would always say, well, why do you care about how I sit as long as I listen to class and I have good points in the tests at the end of the year? Why would you be worried? So it never occurred to me that my posture would change the way I feel about myself, or would change the way I see the world. But that was exactly the case. Although it was not a miraculous change, but for example, for the first time in 16 years, I was aware of my breath. I'd been breathing, of course, all my life, but I wasn't aware of it. And now this is big surprise. How come that something so close, like my breath, had slipped my attention, or the sounds of the birds outside of the window? So I decided to come a second time, a third time. After 1 year, I was the only one who had come each time. And after 1 year, the teacher left the school and asked me if I could, or I would maybe continue with that Zazen circle. I was now responsible for organizing the room and for looking at the clock and hitting the bell and stuff like that. And that's at age 17 when I started to read books about Buddhism and Zen, D.T. Suzuki and stuff like that. And I also came across this story of that young Indian prince who lived 2,500 years ago, but decided that he didn't want to become the king, as his parents had expected. because he said that life is suffering, famously. And to a lot of us in the West, that sounds so negative. Because, of course, I mean, life can be depressing sometimes, but then it's also beautiful other times. And why would you say that life is suffering? But the point of the Buddha was, in the end, there's always this feeling of unsatisfactoriness. It's not that you're always in pain. It's not that you're always in deep suffering, but there's always something missing. Exactly what Uchiyama writes in this epilogue here. There's always this feeling, but there could be something more. There could be a little bit more luxury in my life, a little bit more beautiful girls, a little bit more happiness, whatever. But what happens is you grow older, you're not happy about that, you get sick, you're not happy about that, eventually you die, and you're certainly not happy about that either. And that also goes for a king. So he decided to leave the palace and meditate under a tree. And I found that cool at the time, because in my case, when I was 7, I lost my mother. My mother was 37 when she died of cancer. So at that early age, when I was still in elementary school, I asked myself, if we all have to die, why would I do homework now? What's the meaning of doing homework? And my father says, well, if you don't do homework, you don't get good grades and you won't get to the next grade in school. And my question to that is, so who cares? Why would I want to get good grades? And my father says, so that eventually you can go to university. But why do I have to go to university? So that you can get a good job. But when I see how my father leaves home every morning to go to his job, he doesn't look especially happy about that. So I asked my father, why do you need a job? And my father says, well, to earn money, of course. Why do you have to earn money? So that I can feed you, boy. And but the question is still, but as my mother died, you're gonna die, I'm gonna die, everybody's gonna die. What's the reason? What's the meaning of the game? And when I asked my father, what's the meaning of life in the first place? He made a funny face and said, well, you have to ask the teachers in school. But when I asked the teachers in the elementary school, they said it's too early to discuss that. Wait until you're in high school, and we're going to teach you in high school. But the feeling that the teachers don't know so well either. And when I told my friends in school what I was thinking, they said, well, you're a little bit funny. Let's play soccer. We never thought about questions like that. So when with 17, I read those books about Buddhism, for the first time, I found somebody who had the feeling, oh, that guy actually thought about the same problems, had the same questions that I had, and he invested in his life in solving them. And that happened to be Zazen. So when I was 16, I had no idea that that could be actually connected to this essential question that I had. But then with 17, I discovered, oh, it's not only about posture and about feeling good and about being aware of the breath, but there's also connected to these existential questions. So as I had nothing else in life that I was especially interested in doing, no job or whatever I wanted to have in the future, very soon I thought I'm going to become a Zen monk in Japan, because especially the books by D.T. Suzuki were popular. So Buddhism, for me, it was Zen. And I studied Japanese at university to prepare myself. And then in 1990, 31 years ago, I came to Kyoto for a year. And that's where I met Okumura Shohaku, or Shohaku Okumura, the Western way, who is now a teacher in Indiana. At the time, he was living close to Kyoto. I went to the not weekly, but monthly session. Session is 5 days sitting in a row from morning to night without even, taking showers. So I did these monthly session, and then I heard about Antai-ji, a monastery where Sawaki Roshi used to be the abbot, that used to be located in Kyoto, but it had moved to the northern coast, north of Kyoto. And I went there through the introduction of Showaku Okumura. And the first thing the abbot there told me when I arrived as a 22-year-old, he asked me, well, why have you come to Antai-ji? And I said, to learn something about Buddhism. And the abbot said, this is not a school. You create Antai-ji. And that impressed me a lot. You create Antai-ji. How can a 22-year-old who doesn't really speak Japanese properly, who doesn't know really anything much about Zen, create Antai-ji? But that was a big motivation for me in the beginning. Oh, it's about me. It's not about getting some knowledge from the teacher or from the older monks. It's about my practice, what I do here. And eventually I became a monk there. I ordained. I got the name Muho. Before I was Olaf. From Olaf, I changed to Muho. And in Zen, it's not only about sitting. For example, it's about work. Antai-ji is self-sufficient, so there's lots of work in the fields. We grow our own rice. Trees have to be felled for wood for cooking. And also the cooking practice in the kitchen is important. But I, in the beginning, was really bad at cooking in a way that's enjoyable for Japanese people. For example, the udon noodles. I wasn't really familiar with udon noodles. So the first day I cooked them kind of spaghetti al dente style. And the Japanese complained that they were too hard. So the next day I decided to make them really soft. So I cooked them for 30 minutes, but then they dissolved. And again, I was criticized for that. And at one point I said, well, actually, I haven't come to Antai-ji to learn about cooking. I'm here to practice Zen. And when the abbot, my teacher, heard that, he said, it's not about you. You don't count at all. And that's not unusual in a Zen monastery, that people tell you it's not about you. It's about giving up yourself and throwing yourself into each little thing. But when I heard that from my teacher, at first I thought, well, how can that be? A couple of years ago, you said you create Antai-ji, and now you tell me it's not about me. How can these two things go together? Either it's about me, I create Antai-ji, but then I have to be important. Or it's not about me, but then how can I create Antai-ji? And for me, that was a kind of koan that I worked with these 8 years that I studied under my teacher. It's all about me in a way, that it's my practice and I create my own world, the way I live, the way I use my senses, and the attitude I have in life. On the other hand, it's not about me at all. It's not about this player in the game. So an expression I recently use a lot is, you have to quit the game. You have to have a position outside of the game. And then you join the game again, but you play with different rules. It's not about your points anymore, but in Buddhism, we would say it's about living as a bodhisattva. You join the game, but you play in a way that makes it enjoyable for everyone. It's not about you that needs to win. But, well, my teacher didn't talk about the game and quitting the game, joining the game. He just said you create Antai-ji and you don't count at all. And then at age 31 or so, in Soto you say shiho, so you get Dharma transmission. Your teacher says, well, maybe it's time for you to leave and stand on your own feet. And you can go back to Germany, found your own center there if you want to. But I decided to stay in Japan for a while, maybe go to a big city and start a Zen group there. I was thinking Tokyo, Osaka. But then I realized rent is high in the big cities. But there were a lot of homeless people living in the park. And when I saw that, I thought I can do that too. I can live here for free, set up my tent in a park and start to sit every morning at 6 a.m. in front of the tent. At first, I was sitting there alone, but then I went to an internet cafe. It was 2001, and I just discovered about the internet.
Yeah.
And I set up my own homepage and invited people to join me. And then eventually people started to come and sit with me early mornings in the park. But then the following year, in February 2002, my teacher died in an accident in Antai-ji. There's lots of snow there in the winter, and he was trying to clear the road of the snow with a bulldozer, and he had an accident with the bulldozer, died. And I was called back to Antai-ji. First, my older Dharma brothers told me, well, please take care of the temple until spring, and then we decide who's going to be the next teacher. But it turned out that nobody really wanted to become the next teacher there, so I ended up with the job. And that was 20 years ago exactly. So I did that job for almost 20 years until I retired formally last year. So there's a nun that practiced with me for the last 10 years in Antai-ji, and now she's responsible for the monastery, and I'm back in Osaka now. And I don't live in the park anymore, but I weekly on Sundays, I still sit outside. And that's basically, well, my way, how I got into this practice and why I'm here now in this room in Osaka.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And, you know, that's going to kind of loop back around again into, you know, how did this book come about that you helped put together and translate?
Yeah, I'm looking around here for the original. I usually have the original sitting around with me. This is kind of a similar version. I mean, there's the original Japanese version that I discovered in the library of Antai-ji when I was still 23, 24, 25. And although it's in Japanese, all of these quotes are very short. Like for the first ones are quite famous. For example, in English, you can't even trade a single fart with the next guy. Each and every one of us has to live out his own life. So they're all short like this. So each day I was kind of, in the beginning, using a dictionary, translating one or two for myself. And usually they gave me a lot of help. Some of them I had already heard in Europe because I was training in a sangha, in a dojo that belonged to the Deshimaru tradition. So through the Deshimaru tradition in Europe, I had heard of Sawaki, but then I discovered these sayings in the Japanese original. First for myself, I translated them little by little. And then after I left Antai-ji and lived in the park in Osaka, I had a lot of time. So I did that more seriously. And when I started with the homepage, I uploaded it to the homepage. First in German. So first in German, and there was a German publisher who was interested in that. So the book that now came out in English actually came out in German already almost 20 years ago and was pretty popular in German. So I started with an English translation. And then there was an American guy who lived in Switzerland at the time, who's now living in Japan. Jesse Reiho Hash is his name. He wrote me that he had also started his English translation. So we decided to do it together. And it took us a long time, more than a decade now, because Jesse, my partner in crime, so to speak, he's kind of a perfectionist. I probably would have thrown it out 10 years ago or so when it was maybe 80%, 70% quality. But Jesse wanted to do it well. So it took us a lot of time, but I'm I'm really happy that it's out now, and I hope that it's gonna find some readers, because at least for me, each of these quotes is really gold. I mean, it's especially if you're into Zen practice, and even maybe if you're not into Zen practice, I think some of these quotes really hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, one thing about Kodo Sawaki is he's kind of impactful. It's like almost like, I know, if you look at him as like a kind of like a spiritual teacher, you hear some of the things he says and you're like, whoa, it's like very blunt, very direct,
Yes.
just straight cut the crap and straight to the point. I believe you or somebody else described it as like very spicy
Yes.
attitude. So for people, say people are interested and they get the book, is there a way you'd recommend how people use the book?
How to use the book.
Right. Or some ideas on, yeah.
I mean, you can read it from cover to cover, one by one, but then there's 34 chapters, and all of these chapters got a title by the Japanese editor, and I think the titles are also quite well. So one can also in the beginning just skip through the titles of the chapters and just start wherever you think that it's addressing you. For example, to you who would like to leave your rivals in the dust, or to you who are sobbing because somebody put one over on you, to you who are impressed by scientific and cultural progress, to you who wants to begin with the Zen. So probably some people are more interested in one thing than the other. So I mean, you don't. It's not like a philosophical treatise where you have to read each of the chapters in order. You can start right at the end, or if you have this feeling, I've been practicing for years now, but I still have the feeling that something is missing, then you should start with the epilogue by Uchiyama. That might be the right thing for you. But you can also start with a fart story in the beginning. It's also funny.
Yeah. And I do want to also get into Zen practice, and you're from the Soto
Yes.
lineage, which is also again Dogen, very Dogen heavy. For people they're just maybe they come across the book, or they're just hearing about Zen. How would you advise they go forward on that?
On Zen practice.
Yeah. Like how should they go about if they're just hearing about Zen? Like practicing, finding a teacher.
A lot of people, including myself, recommend finding a teacher, recommend finding a group. And of course, you could ask why. Why can I not just practice in my own bedroom? And of course, you can. But it gives you a lot of motivation, strength if you have a group, if you have a teacher to whom you can ask questions when they arise. It can also be very helpful when it doesn't happen too often, but you sit in your bedroom really seriously for several weeks, a month, and maybe you have something, an experience that feels like enlightenment. Doesn't happen too often, but it can happen. And it's very good to have a teacher to tell you, let go of that too. Don't get too attached to that. That happens from time to time, but don't get too excited. Get back on the cushion. If you don't have that teacher, you start to get really full of yourself. Maybe you start to preach. You call yourself a Zen master. And there has been a small number, but there has been examples of these people who probably had some kind of experience, but then they get very attached to that, my enlightenment experience. So it's also helpful to have a teacher to take that away from you when you have the thought, I grasp something there. It's good to have a teacher to take that away from you. But also, I mean, just when it comes to the sitting posture, it's not too difficult to explain that. But when you really sit, you don't see your posture. But if you sit in a group, then people can help you check that posture. And if you can't sit in full lotus or half lotus, it's not a problem. But eventually, you might get some advice what you can do so that you can, over the weeks, months, years, can sit in a better posture. So I would certainly recommend getting in touch with some teacher, ideally not only online, but also meet that person in real life. If you cannot live close to a Zen center, at least visit it several times a year, go to meditation retreats. But of course, there's also lots of input that you can get online, but it will never replace a face-to-face connection with a teacher. So in Zen, that face-to-face connection with a teacher is really important. And I would certainly recommend that if people are serious about sitting, they don't just learn it from the books only and don't learn it from the internet only, but also in real life find like-minded people.
Yeah, and you kind of went over a little, but Kodo Sawaki, how did he talk about satori?
How did he talk about satori? I mean, what he says in this book is don't be too attached about it. No? There's some people who might have some experience and they carry it around with them almost like a tattoo, like here, I'm enlightened. They have this kind of satori tattoo, and everybody needs to know about their satori. This experience I had 3 years ago when I did this really hard retreat. And I mean, that's not what we call satori. That's the biggest illusion you can have. I mean, satori, if you want to use the word, means to let go, let go, let go. It's not something you can carry around with you, you can show around. It means to let go. So I think you find that also in this book. He says somewhere, to win means to be in illusion. To lose means satori. Satori means to lose. Whenever you think you gain something, now I got it. That's another illusion. So it's just the opposite of our usual mindset. Usually we sit with the idea, I want to gain satori. And Sawaki would say, no, you have to let go. And once you lose something, that's satori. Once you lose, you have to lose. And the more you lose, the closer you get to that, what you could call satori. Satori means to let go.
Yeah, and no, go ahead.
And the moment you let go, usually all of us, when we do Zazen, we do it because we want to do Zazen, we expect something from that, we invest our energy and time into the practice. So who's doing Zazen here? I'm doing Zazen. It's my practice. But then at one point you have to realize, no, you don't do Zazen. You cannot do Zazen. Zazen is doing Zazen. Zazen is doing Zazen. And that's, you could say, satori, when you let go of this idea, I do Zazen. No. Zazen does Zazen, and you just, how do you say, how would you say in English? You succumb. In a way, it's succumb. Surrender. I mean, a lot of teachers and a lot of practitioners probably feel it like this, express it like this. It's like succumbing to this activity of Zazen, doing Zazen. Until then, you try to master Zen. I master Zen. I master my life. No. You allow Zen to master you. You allow your life to master you. And that's egoless practice. And if you want to, but you don't have to, you can also call that satori. But in that moment, there's no need to call it satori, label it as satori. But when what you lose is this idea, I do, I want, I grasp. No, no. Zazen does Zazen. Zazen grasps you in a way. The moment you let go, you realize, oh, here, I'm sitting on the hand of Zazen.
Yeah. And in Soto, so for the Soto Zen, is that exclusively Mahayana Buddhism?
I could imagine that different practitioners think about that in different ways. I would say it's Mahayana, in that it's not about your own salvation only, but it's about the salvation of every and even the last living being. So even if you think you found the answer, you found nirvana in samsara, as long as there's still one crying person that says I need help, you shouldn't go to rest. Your practice needs to continue. On the other hand, people have pointed out that in a way, inside Mahayana, it's kind of also going back to the roots, to the original Buddhism, which means, well, rather than talking a lot about salvation of all living beings and making different categories of bodhisattvas and reciting this sutra and that sutra, let's get back to what the Buddha did. And what the Buddha did was sitting under a tree. So Zen is that school in Mahayana who emphasizes that a lot, that, well, if Buddha said, how can we excuse ourselves from sitting? So let's start here. But a difference from Theravada is that that's a practice that you don't do only for your own salvation, but you want to share with others. It's a communal practice, and Zazen is also not the end of the way. When you get off the cushion, in a way, you could say that's where the real practice starts. When you get back to your family, when you get back to your job, that's where the real practice starts. And that's probably something that maybe they wouldn't tell you in Theravada like that. In Theravada, it's more like get out of the game, quit the game, but then you don't join again. That's the Mahayana part, is you join again. It's just that you have to play with different rules. And that's sometimes very hard because you lose, of course. And even as Sawaki tells you, losing is satori. You don't want to lose all the time. You have to pay the rent at the end of the month. If I only lose, how do I pay the rent? So that's kind of the koan, the Mahayana koan. You want to play the game, and it's not supposed to be only about you, but you also have to pay the rent. But you also want to help others. So I would say, yes, definitely Zazen is Mahayana, but it's a kind of back to the roots form of Mahayana, I would say.
Yeah, and I don't want to imprint too much media into this, but that's almost, like stepping out of the game and then going back in is very much like the Matrix in a way. If people are into the Matrix films, and Neo, comes out of the Matrix and he goes back in to help liberate people, essentially. So that's they use those themes to create the film, which I thought was interesting. But also in Zen and Soto Zen, there's no like levels of awakening like they use in Theravada, like Stream Enterer or Arhat. Is there or no?
Not that I ever heard of. Sometimes people ask me, so where are you? People from other traditions. Are you a stream enterer yet? Or maybe already are arahant? And I have no idea. I mean, this whole idea of kind of checking yourself, where I am. Is this stage 1 or 2 or 3? I mean, that's what I call the game. And people always counting koans in Rinzai. I mean, of course, in Rinzai, they know it's not about counting the koans, but I did 1 year of Rinzai practice in a monastery in Kyoto, and then you start to do that. How many koans did I already solve? And how about the guy, my neighbor? Am I faster than him? So this whole kind of stages of enlightenment, honestly, I think it's stupid because it just brings you back into the game, but not in the Mahayana sense. It's about how many more steps do I need to get to arahantship. Who cares? Who
Yeah.
cares? Who cares if you ever get an arahant or not? It's not about you.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
what my teacher wanted to tell me when I did that noodle thing. That's not about you. It's not about
Yeah.
it's not about your status of enlightenment. Who's interested in that?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And I actually reading through some of the book, I it's really interesting to see Kodo Sawaki's the way he deals with all of the different like situations and perspectives and kind of different things actually that is surprising, like that there's a lot of like everyday life stuff in there, and it's really interesting to see his approach to all that. Is there a chapter in there that really stands out to you, or a few chapters in the book to you that really stand out to you?
Hmm. Probably in my case, in the center of the book, there's a number that relate directly to Zazen and this idea. Yeah, but I want Satori after all. And Uchiyama in the epilogue, Uchiyama is less of this kind of hitting the hammer on the nail, but Uchiyama is more kind of, he uses more words, but that can also be helpful. But Sawaki, he's addressing this I want my Satori attitude in a quite direct way. So in my case, probably it were especially those chapters related to Zazen and Satori that helped me a lot. And I could imagine that people who have already several years of practice under their belt, they might want to go to those chapters. But somebody who's never done Zazen before, they could start with chapter 1, the first one, to you who's always worried about the eyes of the others. That's probably also something that's addressing a problem that we all have. What are the others thinking about me?
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate you coming on. So for people listening, where could they find the book? I'm gonna have the link in the description, but just for people listening also on the podcast.
Where can they find the book? I would hope that you can find it at the local bookstore, but probably many bookstores don't have it. But you could ask the bookkeeper to order it for you. You can for sure order it on the internet. On YouTube, you find me introducing this book. You find some quotes at the homepage of Antai-ji. The temple Antai-ji has a homepage, and several of these quotes, or quite a lot of them, I would say maybe 10% of the whole book, you can find online on the Antai-ji homepage as well. So if you want to have an idea what it's about. And then I would say, if you don't want it to order it on the internet, go to your local bookstore and help them to gain a little money.
Yeah. And it's also going to be on Amazon for people who just do everything through Amazon. It's a reality of our world.
Yes.
And for the listeners, the people watching this, do you have any kind of parting words or words of advice?
Words of advice.
Any parting words, right?
Yeah, well, thank you for watching anyway. I mean, if people are still watching at this point, I'm sure this is going to be a good read for them. So thank you for joining. It was an honor to talk to you, and I've never been to America to teach. Maybe it's going to happen at one point, and we can see. I'm going to go to Europe next year. But yeah, it would be great if we could see each other at one point in real life. And until then, I'm glad that you watched. Thank you, and thank you to you, James, for having me here and for this interview.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Thank you so much. And yeah, I really hope you come to America. That'd be fantastic. You know, I'm sorry that I only came across your work just now, you know, through this book, because you know, you really have to seem to have a very deep understanding and a way of communicating the Dharma. So, you know, thank you so much for everything that you do. You know, I know the, you know, the you and the ego, but you know, for everything that you know, it's ironic, right? And that's what I love
Yeah.
about Zen is you have these paradoxes.
Yeah.
But you know, again, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and it's greatly appreciated. And I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Have
All
a
right,
good
take
day
care.
or good night.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.